Good afternoon to everybody and welcome to the panel on misinformation here at the Sony CSL Open House in the wonderful frame of the Maker Faire 2021 in Rome. So today I'm honored of the speakers we have here as guests, and I would like to thank them and to introduce them. First of all, we have Giulia Boldi, a lawyer and researcher on constitutional law, and she does a very innovative work analyzing the misinformation phenomena from a legal perspective. And the idea is to define new jurisprudential tools to contrast the issue of disinformation and taking care also to not damage too much our civil rights of expression and thought. We also have Claudio Cappon, which is the General Secretary of COPEAN, which is the permanent conference of Mediterranean audiovisual operators, and used to be also the director of the Italian Broadcasting Service, RAI, and has been also vice president for 6 years of the European Broadcasting Union. We have Marco Del Mastro, managing director of Agicom, the Italian authority for guarantee on communication. And before working in Agicom, he also worked in the authority for the competition supervision in Italy. And he spent also several years in universities in Italy and abroad as a research fellow. And he's also an economist with several published papers. I would like also to introduce Anja Kaspersen, a senior fellow at Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. She's a published author and a public speaker, and also a firm believer in multilateralism and the power of science and technology diplomacy to ensure responsible innovation and the ethical development and use of intelligent systems. And last but not least, Fabiana Zollo, which is assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science and the research fellow at the Center for the Humanities and Social Change of the University Ca' Foscari of Venice. And she's one of the top scientists on the topic of disinformation. And her work range from misinformation spread and impact on the behaviors to the opinion dynamics. Here today we are going to discuss about how it's possible to reach a post-fake era, in the sense that we are struggling to face this challenge as a society. This challenge is an unprecedented one, because on one side we have a lot of new media that radically changed the dynamic of information, and on the other side we have our very societies that have a kind of system, the democracy, that has reached a level of development that is unprecedented. These two aspects are the challenge we are going to face, but on the other hand, we have also unprecedented opportunities. These opportunities are given by the huge amount of data we have coming from our technologies, our information technologies, but also comes from the fact that the challenge we have in front of us has to be faced from several angles, because the subjects into play are many. Fake news is not just a problem for journalism. It's a problem for science. It's a problem for editors. It's a problem for institutions and regulators. And all these resources, all this expertise need to work at once to face this challenge. So I start from my side, because I am by formation a scientist. And as a scientist, often I'm kind of disappointed that our work doesn't make it out of academia. Sometimes I have to admit that sometimes we do not even try. But on the other hand, there are a lot of amazing results that could be used actually against misinformation. And that's why I wanted to ask Fabiana to tell us which are the most interesting advancement in the most interesting scientific results about the study of misinformation that, in your opinion, could be used, could have an impact in the short term and also in the long term.
Thank you, Pietro. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you hear me well. So maybe I can start giving some context. I'm a computer scientist, so as you said, I'm a data scientist. So I work mainly with online data and, for example, social media data to study this phenomenon. And so what I want to say is that one of the things that is very useful when we want to tackle a complex phenomenon like misinformation is to understand also the context where misinformation is happening. So I will mainly refer now to the online digital environment and social media, because what we have observed from the scientific perspective on this, and what we are observing is that the context where this is happening is really relevant also to understand how then we can develop counter strategies. On one hand, the fact that we are in this digital information system is, of course, a great potentiality for us. We can access lots of information, a great variety of information. What we also have seen is that, and this information can spread very easily. So this enabled digital communication all over the world, and it's for sure something that we can also assess as positive for our society. On the other side, what we have to take into account is that on the other side of the screen, we are human beings with our limitations, and I will focus a bit on this, because if we take into account the environment, what we have is that we have lots of information. This information is spreading easily, very rapidly. And what we also observed was that with the advent of the internet and then with social media, especially the sources where we can get this information are really a lot. So we can say that today we have a very heterogeneous set of information sources, and so we have to process this information as users. But the really, I would say, innovative aspect of the internet and social media is that on the other side, the user is not only is not a passive actor in this system, but it can also produce its own information. And this, of course, can have also an impact on the quality of information, because I mean, we have more sources, we can also have more unreliable sources. But I would say the very important thing that we should count is how we, as human beings on the other side, we process this information. Because as I said, the limits that we have are the same that we have in our real life, let's say, not in the digital one. So the fact that we tend to select information, interpret the information, for example, in a way that is already current with our system of beliefs, we have seen that this is really driving also the way in which we are selecting information online. And I'm talking here about some cognitive biases, and in particular about confirmation bias. Why? Because this is, so if we understand also what's driving our selection of information and our selection of sources online, and this can be a crucial point in how we address the challenge. What we observed was that indeed this mechanism that I'm repeating is a mechanism that is there even, is something that is active in us as human beings, but can be, as we have seen, using online data, can be fostered, for example, by some algorithms, for example, some newsfeed algorithms, where the content that users are accessing are, the selection of content that users are accessing is based on their past choices, past behaviors, and and what they like, basically. So what's happening is that this enables and fosters the formation of groups of like-minded people, like-minded individuals, what we usually refer to as echo chambers. And the fact of having echo chambers, I'm not saying that echo chambers are bad, but it's important to recognize that this very strong polarization and the existence of these groups exists because it can really affect some of the countermeasures that we can try to apply, for example, to contrast misinformation. Because in this direction, we can consider misinformation just as a particular type of information with specific characteristics that, on the other side, get consumed by users in exactly the same way in which users consume any other kind of information. And what, for example, we have seen is that when you have a very polarized structure like this, and when you have echo chambers, for example, trying to let corrections, so for example, fact-checking or debunking attempts, reach the echo chambers that can be in that particular situation your target is very difficult. Because usually these groups, so the fact that you have these groups also means that the interaction between the groups, and so letting information pass from one group to another is very difficult. And so, for example, what we have seen is that polarization indeed is one of the key elements that we should take into account to contrast misinformation. And we have seen that if you consider polarization, you're also able, and not the content, but how users are interacting with such content, you're also able to, let's say, predict what topics, for example, will be subject to misinformation in the short term. And so instead of acting after a piece of misinformation is already there and is already spreading, for example, one countermeasure can be to do something before. For example, to try to reduce polarization around that topic, or change and adapt the communication strategy to prevent that topic to be subject of fake news in the short term.
Thanks a lot. I agree with all you said, and I work on some of the topics you mentioned. And sometimes when I work on these things, I feel a bit like if I'm a scientist, kind of developing new weapons in a war that somebody's fighting elsewhere. Like if there are soldiers on the front, very far from where I am. And those soldiers in this kind of metaphor are the journalists, because they are kind of fighting directly misinformation. And in a sense, I feel that the community of scientists is kind of far from their community. And that's why I wanted to ask to Claudio about the Journalist Trust Initiative that is, as far as I can understand, an initiative to support quality journalism.
Yes. In fact, misinformation is now the central issue of the discussion about the development of the communication world, and the challenge facing all the media organizations, because there are more and more put in question because of the spreading of hate speech, fake news, etc. And as a kind of, I would say, collateral damage of the digital revolution of the last 20 years. So many initiatives, projects, ideas, proposals are around in the world. Also at political level, the European Union is pushing for more regulation, for example, with policies like the European Action Act, etc. And at professional level, the community of journalists is also trying to deal with the problem. Many are the initiatives. The one you mentioned, a Journal Trust Initiative, has been promoted and launched by Reporters Sans Frontières, an NGO dealing with freedom of expression and protection of journalists. The European Broadcasting Union, Agence France Presse, was launched in Paris in May 2018. Basically, the idea that distinguishes this proposal from other projects is that the aim is to enhance and support professional journalism through the definition of indicators or standards of quality, not for the content, that is the news themselves, but for the process, that is how a media outlet produce information. And the idea was to use methodology and procedure used by international standardization organization like ISO or CEN, Comité Européen de Normalisation, for the definition of standards for, let's say, through specific technical specification for any kind of industries or services. So, under the supervision of the AFNOR, which is the French branch of CEN, the European Normalization Center, the project was launched with 130 people contributing from any kind of professional organization or stakeholders like Agicom, and under the supervision and the methodology of the Normalization Center. The result was a document called the CEN Workshop Agreement, by the way, number 17493. You can find it free on internet. It was a result of more than 1 year of work of different groups. It proceeded through a project. It was at the beginning through different teams and groups working on the definition of these standards, and each step has been approved by the consensus of the participants. So this workshop agreement basically consists of a declaration of principle and ethical behavior of professional journalism and two sections. One is on identity and transparency, asking the media outlet who you are, and the other, professionalism and accountability, how you work. For the identity, you have to disclose the owner, the sources of revenues, indirect links with governments or others, and through professionalism and accountability, whether you have a code of conduct, if you have internal review process for the information, etc., etc. The full adhesion to this agreement requires a declaration and explicit commitment to the respect of the principle and ethical behavior of journalism, and on the other hand, the compliance of the relevant media outlet with what the indicators define those section A and B. The system is also transforming in a questionnaire 129 points that may be easily machine readable and also easily assessed by internal and external sources. Basically, the aim of the project is to contribute to enhance trust in journalism through the definition not of some ideal or quality, but some measurable and accessible items. And so to give the citizen the necessary information to be aware who is producing this information and where it comes from. It's a bit like European rules for food quality branding. You don't necessarily may like what you eat, but you have the guarantee where it comes from, how it is produced, which is the content, who is the producer. So the project now is in a development phase. with 2 steps: accreditation, because of course the whole aim is that these indicators, rather the compliance to these indicators may be audited by external sources to give them a mark of quality. And so the RSF, who is managing the whole process, is now dealing with accreditation bodies worldwide that may license this program to external auditors, like, for example, Deloitte or Price. And then there is a web application, very easy to use, and that may be through which all the process may be dealt. At the moment, we have, more than a dozen organizations that completed the self-assessment process, and 4 among them companies like Canada Broadcasting Corporation, France Television, Der Spiegel, the German magazine, and 4 have completed also the audit through an external auditor, Deloitte. It's Swiss Info, which is the online news channel of the Swiss television. Again, Canada Broadcasting Corporation, France Television, and also other outlets are testing it. Even RAI, through the channel RAI News, is testing that. And now RSF is trying to market all the process. It's also the development of this is also funded by European Union, and we expect good results in the future.
That's a very, very interesting initiative. And I find in particular that give to the citizens the tools to be aware of where the news comes from, who pays for those news, and this mission of transparency is very, very important. It's very crucial for this battle. Another important element, I think, is to bring the fight at the international level, because sometimes we tend to fight these things like in our single nations, forgetting that there is a whole international level of the issue that has to be faced. And speaking of this, I wanted to ask Anya, actually, what she thinks about the problem at the international level, and how do you deal with this at the international affairs?
Thank you so much, Pietro, and thank you for having me as part of this very interesting conversation. So if you allow me, Pietro, because we've been hearing 2 speakers already, and I know we're speaking to quite a wide and diverse audience, maybe it would be good to just quickly, for me, just to run through, I will come to your question, but just run through a few issues around what misinformation and disinformation is.
Of course.
Would that be okay?
Of course, go on.
So the thing, and this is very relevant to your question around how does this impact on international affairs, because this is point around deliberation. So whereas misinformation is false information where there's an unclear intent, if this is indeed intentional to mislead people, it is clear that disinformation is very intentionally set up to manipulate, to falsify, and to deliberately mislead people. And this becomes very important when you look at this in an international context. What type of information is spread with what type of intent? And the same thing in your title, in your blurb, or the description of the session, you have this very interesting word which you call the infosphere phenomenology, which may not be all that clear to everyone listening to this conversation. What does that actually mean? Well, in clear terms, or in practical terms, it means what type of digital information activities have real impact, kinetic impact on society, on humans. So what is important to me, and when you look at this, whether you look at this from international level, you look at this at a more societal level, is that these decentralized platforms, social media platforms, which is often at the source of a lot of the disinformation and misinformation going on, deliberately or non-deliberately, is becoming mediators of meaning. And society, and looking at this historically, often mimics that meaning. So when social platforms shape certain narratives, pushes certain narratives, very quickly you will see that society and individuals relating to these narratives are starting to mimic them in their real life. And that is a real concern if you don't have checks and balances to counter those narratives, and if people don't know where to go to look for those narratives. I'm going to run through a couple of more points, which I think is important for this discussion, and then we'll end with answering your question. And they'll be very short points. I'm very mindful of time.
Don't worry,
And
take your time.
Yes, and with, the social platforms essentially becoming arbiters of truth, it is very dangerous for any form of democratic governance or thinking about how we can democratically control the internet in its current form. Because the decentralization of these platforms and the way they are being embedded into many parts of the world, and we seem to sometimes forget that these media platforms have actually become the way of many people, especially in vulnerable settings, to access the internet. So when most of us just experiencing some inconvenience when a certain platform went down earlier this week, for many that meant there was no online access. This is the entry point of coming onto the internet, not like, so it's very different from the European and the American context from that perspective. What AI is doing, and this is very important, and this is the setting where you're discussing this, is of course it allows us to tailor the disinformation in much more precise ways, and also to fuel the misinformation narratives that are going on. And why am I saying that? Because where, both machine learning and algorithmic technologies, the tailoring, so you obviously can manipulate the narrative much more effectively, but you can also there's also a tendency of treating the output of certain processes as truths, where it's in effect is just the correlation of data and there's no causation and consequence to be induced from it, but it's being treated as such. And so you have an accidental misinformation, if you may, using these technologies sometimes. So I'm not now speaking about how the same technology can be used for solutions, but with one of the problems that occur in this context. There is the very high risk of othering, which is what I focus a lot on. This is very important in international affairs context, how you can scale us and them type of narratives. I used to work in peacekeeping in the past. And I also wrote a study some years back, where we were essentially speaking about much less technically advanced tools than what we have today, but where those tools like radio was used to fuel conflicts both in the Balkans and Rwanda. It distorted truth, but also our sense of belonging. It created conflicts between people in ways that we hadn't seen before, where you're essentially creating an us and them type of narrative to the use of these very basic technologies. And what we can do now, the scale of it and the reach of the social platforms is obviously what takes us into a very new setting and much more dangerous setting where things can move much faster. So the topic of this conversation was also, and as you were saying, Peter, you mentioned that journalists are the soldiers on the front line of disinformation. The question I would like to ask, to all those participating is, are we training journalists to actually address this type of problems? Do they have sufficient amount of interdisciplinarity in their background? Are they being fitted to ask the right type of questions? And also being very wary of the danger of journalism to reinforce certain types of narratives that can often happen when you are looking at the technical and scientific side of things. And we've seen that happen already. We also seen an increasing tendency of scientists trying to speak up about be it the immaturity of current technological developments, the dangers of trying to fit incompetent AI or autonomous technologies into sensitive systems. And when those comments are affecting stock prices and return on investment, there are real attempts of silencing these scientists and also journalists. And how we're preparing to that, which brings me to another issue, was this the duty of care and the changing of the duty of care concept for any organization operating digitally. And how you're protecting your staff, how you're protecting journalists, how you're protecting those working, be those as arbiters of truth, trying to bring out the right perspectives. Or as in my background, when you send out peacekeepers or humanitarian workers, you're increasingly operating in a digital realm and on social media platforms, which also makes you much more vulnerable for being the attack or being the target of such disinformation or misinformation campaigns. So there's a real need to really reassess and revisit this concept of digital, of duty of care, but in a digital context. There's also the risk of the overfitting technology and mitigation overreach, so there's obvious challenges with disinformation, and it's difficult to find the right balance to prevent and mitigate those attacks. And if you are too expansive in your classifications, as some of the speakers have much more expertise on than I do from a computer science perspective, you risk silencing accurate information. If you're not expansive enough, you will let harm go undetected. So it is important to have a broader discussion on this and to really have a public discourse on this and empower people to be part of that discourse, as the previous speaker was talking about. And when we have those discourses, it's also important to think about the vulnerability aspect of it. So you can't really have a discussion around disinformation and misinformation without also discussing the broader issues that are now existing in the cybersecurity realm, which is highly linked in terms of spoofing of data and and in terms of spreading very harmful narratives through intercepting systems that we have. And then the last bit I just wanted to mention was the issue around cultural narratives and situational awareness and contextual understanding. And why I'm mentioning this is that, so I have worked in many different organizations, and in one of them, in the International Committee of the Red Cross, we saw a trend in the people that we were receiving at our facilities in war-ridden places around the world, that people were no longer asking for health assistance or food or even protection. They were asking for Wi-Fi connections and a place to charge their phones, because this was now their lifeline to reach their family or to think about their future. But it also made them very vulnerable, because some of them were fleeing from oppression, some were fleeing from a war. And so the responsibility of both platforms, but also telecommunications providers, etc., to really think around how we are so different in our settings and what our vulnerabilities are. For me, who's placed in a country where there's no war, I can use my phone in a certain way and my platforms in a certain way. But if you are in Syria or in Yemen or in a country in Africa or in a country in Asia, a country in Latin America or even Europe, it could be used in a very different way. Yet the algorithms and the way that these platforms operate doesn't really distinguish between these different contexts and the different protection needs of people. And certainly we're not investing in the civic education that needs to be part of any form of digital empowerment of people. So those are just some broader issues that I've found that would be important to add on to what has been discussed so far. And certainly from an international context, this is deeply impacting on geopolitical conditions and dynamics. There's a high risk of disinformation narratives, taking form and getting traction. We've seen that happen already. There are a lot of discussions happening within the big international organizations on how to counter it. So both in terms of what would international regulations look like, what would be the standards, that would oversee these sort of day-to-day ways of handling this. We already seen platforms take bilateral decisions on excluding democratically elected leaders, and regardless of where you stand on the personalities involved, it is a much bigger discussion whether a decentralized social media platform should be in a position to do so, and what will be the repercussions of it. So there are some really big trends happening in this space, which needs to get much more attention. And of course, I come from a background of spending most of my time in the conflict area, and in any type of warfare setting, any type of international conflict, these are the favored tools of warfare: deception, propaganda, using disinformation. Any tools that can allow you to do disinformation at scale is, of course, very attractive tools, and that requires a different type of discussion. So are we any closer to having a unified response to this? We're not there yet, but there's a broad public discourse. But I think sometimes we haven't really gotten to, we asked the right question. We have a lot of the right answers of what needs to be done, but I'm not sure if we're asking the right questions, and the questions to whom. And sometimes we forget, some of these platforms who has been with us, one of the most prominent ones has been with us for more than 17 years. And only now are we really starting to address the very harmful impact such a platform can have when it is not being contextually situated, and is not being positioned in the public discourse and in the public regulatory discourse in the right way.
Yeah.
Over to you, Pietro.
Thanks a lot. You brought out a lot of very interesting aspects. In particular, the role of platforms is, as you say, crucial. But the thing is that even if sometimes they promise to do so, I don't think they will self-regulate. But on the other hand, the institutions that could try to enforce this cannot do it freely. I mean, they have to balance different things. There are also the freedoms of speech and thought to be protected, even on those platforms who can try to exploit those freedoms in order to make difficult for the regulators to act. But about this balance, I wanted to ask Giulia, which is researching exactly about this, if she can try to enlighten me about the state of art on this, because I have to admit I do not know almost anything about it.
Yes, thank you, Pietro. So to answer your question, a premise is necessary. Because of the magnitude of the disinformation issues and because of the characteristic of new technologies that we deal with, this issue should be addressed globally, of course, or at least regionally. It means that the minimum level of action that should be taken is at the European Union level. Now, the constitutional principle common to and shared by all the European countries and in general all modern democracies give freedom of speech a strong but not absolute protection. For example, Article 10 on the European Convention of Human Rights provides that this freedom can be limited for the sake of national security, territorial integrity, or public safety, protection of health of other people's reputation or rights. The thing is that the fact that this freedom can be limited does not imply that the falsehood per se falls within this limitation. Actually, on the contrary, falsehood per se falls within the protection of freedom of speech. The less strict legal systems at most thinks that false is legally irrelevant. For the false, for fake news or fake information, or to be punished, to be relevant legally, so to be punished, removed, or sanctioned in a way, there should be a harm for another constitutionally protected right, such as national security, public health, etc. So the thing is, the crucial point for constitutional scholars, constitutional law scholars, is whether there is a right to a true and complete information, because not everybody agrees with that. So we don't know if, for the sake of this potential right of real information, of correct information, we can sacrifice the freedom of speech. So, having this principle in mind, the only thing that can be done maybe to fight disinformation is to develop legal tools that address and target information distribution and rather than content per se. So, to this aim, the first step I would think about would be total transparency. Transparency about how algorithms works. People should be aware that echo chambers exist and what they do, what they are. Data awareness. People should be completely aware of what data, I mean, age, gender, sex inclination, political inclination, or movie seen, book read, what data are used, by whom, and in which way this data can influence what they see on their feed, what the content that is featured. Also, a very crucial point would be demonetizing disinformation, because we know disinformation is based on a content that is sensational and emotional, so it's seen maybe 4 or 5 times more than other types of content. Advertisers don't really care where they put what they place their advertisement. as long as it pays. So a crucial point would be demonetizing disinformation, creating rules for advertisement placement, and creating white lists of reliable sources, reliable sites that can be used to advertisement places. Another solution should be the accreditation systems that we were talking about earlier, or, in my opinion, also antitrust policies, because Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, Google, YouTube, they benefit from a network effect. So address dominance, control, and merger control, merger acquisition. That would help create an environment of information that is diverse, variety of sources for users. So, but the first thing, the less dangerous one in terms of compliance with the freedom of speech is, in my opinion, a positive state approach, as opposed to a negative state approach that implies coercive actions such as fining, taxing, or imprisoning. A positive state approach means public media literacy programs in schools, or even media literacy training paid by taxes, of course, by public funds. I came across an interest theory, the inoculation theory. Is a communication and social theory according to which a way to protect an individual from a behavior or maybe an attitude is to pre-expose them to this behavior and this attitude, so exactly like vaccination works. So to this aim, a researcher from Cambridge invented a bad news game in which users can learn to create fake news. The aim of the game is to reach the biggest number of likes or followers or interactions. So the more the news is well constructed and well created, the more followers you get. And they discovered that players have lessened their likelihood to believe for fake information of 20%. So that could be a way in which a positive state approach could, I don't know, improve public programs to fight this kind of problems. In my opinion, there are few tools of technological design that could be maybe used to address this issue. Is it dangerous because of the freedom of speech we were talking about? But something like maybe limiting, for example, we know the banking is not actually doesn't work. So, but maybe instead of debunking, correction could be slightly different, but maybe more effective. And with correction, I mean that we could imagine a way to notify all the users that came across a dubious content that have interacted with it by reposting it or liking it or just sharing it with a counter narrative that is not a fact-checked content, but just a different narrative sensed in the feeds of those who came across the dubious content. Or another solution I can think about is maybe limiting repost, because the principle is if we see a crowd that is running, our instinct is to run as well. So numbers of likes or reposts are always used as a proxy for credibility. So maybe limiting the possibility to repost a dubious content could be useful, or even make the user who wants to repost something click a link to really read what is reposting, so to be sure that the likelihood he doesn't even know what it's reposting is decreased. So I don't know. The bottom line is the border between censorship and fight against a right cause is really small. So we have to pay attention, because actually freedom of speech to date covers also faults per se. So it's difficult to imagine regulation solutions other than those I expressed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Actually, I feel like all of us have different angles to the same problem, and we are all striving in our different fields to make this fight successful. But I've got also the feeling that we might fail if we do not cooperate enough. And since we all come from very different and far communities, with each one with his own culture, sometimes cooperation is not easy. So I wanted to ask Marco,
Okay.
what are the possibilities to build a successful interdisciplinary approach?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
why I kept it for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, first, let me say that, in all the intervention here, it was, clear that misinformation is very a complex phenomenon. Okay, you can analyze the misinformation from a legal point of view, from a journalistic point of view, computer science point of view, economics, and I would say also psychological point of view, because we'll say in a minute that sometimes there are psychological reasons for misinformation, and we have to deal with this, and not only with in this narrative about the narrative of misinformation, let me say, the narrative of misinformation, there are, I think, some simple bad ideas that I want to debunk today.
Please go on.
Yeah, the first is post-truth that I really hate. This is a quotation from Harari, which is a historian from Israel. It's quite clever guy. And he says that, but if this is the era of post-truth, when exactly was the Alchon age of truth? We don't know, of course.
That's true.
And the other thing is, what triggered our transition to the post-truth era? I think that the other concept, it's, easier and more useful for us to understand the misinformation phenomena is, or disinformation phenomena, as Ania pointed out, is post-trust. In reality, there are lots of analyses that show that the trust in institution, in mass media, has gone down in the last 20 years. It's not the problem of facts. It's the problem of trust of the people that provide you the facts. So you don't believe in facts because you don't believe in people that providing you the facts. And so this is I think that the right point of view. The other thing is, I want to debunk is that misinformation beliefs are spreading, okay? This is not true. Of course, misinformation is spreading, but also information is spreading, so it's changing the context. There is a nice analysis of the Brookings Institute that say that every dirty trick that was possible before the internet make it possible today. The biggest difference is that now it's cheaper, faster, and easier to hide. And this is the context, as at the beginning said Fabiana. So the concept has changed. But the false belief, there is these nice articles of the researchers that analyze the debate in the US using New York Times articles for more than 1 century. And they say that the percentage of discussion about conspiracy theory has not changed over 100 years. Of course, there are peaks, but the trend is stable over time. And there is also a nice book of Brotherton 3 years ago that provide you a lots of information or historical information. Well, we need historical information in order to tackle the. So false beliefs are not expanding. The other thing is the misinformation for the first time was analyzed by Richard Hofstetter in 1964 with a very nice paper. He linked misinformation also to a psychological trait. Okay, he was wrong only because he confined misinformation to a niche group of people. Okay, this is not true, again, because there are, lots of surveys that show that misinformation, let me say, misinformation beliefs are spreading in our population, and we all have paranoid thoughts about our colleagues, about our friends sometimes, and so almost everyone has paranoid thoughts sometimes, and so I believe in some conspiracy theory. And this is, there is a lot of literature on the relationship between psychological states of mind and misinformation beliefs. And of course, when anxiety boosts, there is more paranoid thoughts, and so there are more misinformation beliefs. And this is, of course, the situation now in the pandemic situation, where anxiety and panic attacks are expanding, and so it's quite, let me say, natural to have, unfortunately, of course. The other thing is, she mentioned before was fact-checking is not working. This is, unfortunately, it's true, because there is this effect that was discovered by Nian 10 years ago, was the backfire effect. And in some situation, of course, in some situation, not always, there is this outcome that the fact-checking creates a spread in misinformation beliefs. This is, of course, could be counterintuitive, but it's like this, because if as Fabiana said at the beginning, if we have a very polarized system, if you try to convince someone, you risk to boost his beliefs in misinformation. So just to end up with some question, scientific question for science. Yeah, we need more science on this. We need science, since the misinformation is complex, we need more complex science, more complex models that in some sense integrate demand issues and the supply issue, so also psychological issue, and also the demand of information from citizens. We, of course, need analysis of the context, so comparing different kind of social network, this different kind of algorithm, and see if you change the algorithm, there is a change in the discussion, also in the spreading of the literature. We have to, in some sense, check if the factual information and fact-checking and something like JIT. Now there is also already another US initiative, which is NewsGuard. No, if NewsGuard or JIT, of course there are big difference, but the general idea is a ex-ante idea to validate the source, if this works or not. And the other thing is that we have to change also the narratives of scientific narratives, and this is so evident now in the pandemic phase, that the science wasn't so able to communicate to people the discovery of the new discovery. And the latest thing is that we have to admit that we cannot convince everyone, even to very solid facts, because there will always be someone that will not believe in this and this.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
That's true.
Thank you.
And if I can add another aspect, I think that's something that Julia said is very important. We have to try to demonetize disinformation, and I think this comes from something that might be related to your initiative, the Journalist Trust Initiative, because we need to establish shared values, even with this in this polarized context. That would be so important, because currently we tend to give our information systems tend to give more visibility to the extremes. We should change that in order to give a better reputation, not to those who manage to attract a lot of clicks, but to those capable to attract clicks from different sides, different factions. That I mean, if they agree on something, probably it's reliable. If they do not agree on all the rest, and that could be a mechanism to disincentivize sensationalism and extremization of the narratives. Do you want to say something?
Just to say that what Julia said is very important. But one of the aims of the GTI exactly to involve the advertiser in investing in, let's say, accredited journalism. And this is not impossible, because more than before, especially big investors also care for their own reputation. If they invest in, I mean, media outlets that are confirmed to be fake news spreader, they lose a lot nowadays. So they're very much interested in having some kind of guarantee about at least the quality of the process.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to add is that I mean, I feel that the meeting we had today, for me, was very instructive, because I come to learn about a lot of different things I didn't know, and in this way we can try to build synergies. I think we should try to make our communities meet more often. And this is also why I wanted to invite you as soon as possible to our laboratory that we are opening in Rome. As a computer science laboratory, we are hoping these offices in Rome, the Rome Initiative, where one of the major line of research will be exactly about disinformation and misinformation. So consider yourself all invited as soon as you can to come to visit us. So I think the time is more or less over. So I'm afraid that I have to end the discussion here. But next time in our premises, you will be our guest and we can continue this. Okay? So thanks a lot to all of you. And we leave you to the rest of the program of the interviews for the afternoon. Goodbye.